Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are on chapter 48, verse 7. We're in the middle of the Ramban. In mine, it's the second Ramban. In mine, I have two different Rambans titled Vayechi Borei Hashem, and it's the second Ramban titled Vayechi Borei Hashem. We're about 15 lines or so into the Ramban, beginning with the words V'al derech hapshat. What we're trying to understand right now is what Yaakov is telling Yosef, what he means by telling Yosef about his burying of Rachel, Yosef's mother, and then where he buried Yosef's mother. It seems to be a total non sequitur. So the Ramban brought down Rashi, who explains the famous medrash that Rachel needed to be buried where she was, not in Maras HaMachpelah, where the rest of the patriarchs and matriarchs are buried, because when the Jewish people would be exiled, they would pass her grave, and she could daven for them. And what we saw yesterday, in addition to seeing Rashi, the Ramban had an interesting pshat as to how that's intimated in the pasuk here. We're not going to revisit that today, but going further in terms of the Ramban's perspective on things, V'al derech hapshat, gam kein omer lo kein kimisnatzel. There's another reason, says the Ramban, why Yaakov would be telling this to Yosef. It's sort of to excuse himself. Here it is, Yaakov is telling Yosef, it's very important to me that I should be buried in Israel, and obviously he wants to be buried in Maras HaMachpelah. So there's a very obvious thing that could be floating through Yosef's mind, which is, it's so important to you to be buried in Maras HaMachpelah. Why wasn't it important to you to bury my mother in Maras HaMachpelah? If it's so valuable that you should be that people should be buried in Maras HaMachpelah, why don't you do it for my mother? The Kasher Kavar Shamas Leah. By the way, that's where Leah is buried. Therefore, Yaakov says to Yosef, she's buried in Canaan. She died in Canaan, the land of Israel. V'lo nikbara b'chutz la'aretz kasher tiyeh kfuras Mitzrayim l'Yaakov. So the Ramban says that what Yaakov is saying to Yosef is, look, at least Rachel was buried in the land of Israel. Okay, if you bury me here in Egypt, I'm not even being buried in Israel. So it would have been nice if we could bury Rachel in Maras HaMachpelah. That didn't work out. But the main thing I'm asking of you is not, I would like to be buried in Maras HaMachpelah, but my main point to you is bury me in the land of Israel. Once you're going to take me to the land of Israel, there's a logical place to take me, which is Maras HaMachpelah. Umeisa baderech b'fesa pisom. She died in a sudden manner. V'lo yachol l'kavra sham. And I wasn't able to bury her at Maras HaMachpelah. Ki Yazov espanav esbikneu baderech v'yelech meherim ala Maras HaMachpelah. What, I'm going to leave the whole family and the lot and the cattle, etc., just like on the road, and then I'm going to go ahead to bury her in Maras HaMachpelah? It wasn't feasible. Vayei varafuos lachnot osa. And there was nobody to embalm her or anything like that to preserve her body, to give me time. None of that was an option. So I had to bury her now, and I had to bury her more or less where we were. And that's why I buried her there. V'zetam olai. Very interesting pshat. Ramban says that's what Yaakov is saying when he says to Yosef, Mesa olai Rachel. Rachel died on me. I'm not exactly sure what the Ramban means by that. I don't know if he means that it was on me alone to deal with it, or it means that the manner of her death was a tremendous burden in the moment and was very difficult to manage. But one way or the other, the Ramban is saying that Yaakov is intimating this with his word olai. It was a half-day further trip to bury her in Maras HaMachpelah. So was it really so not doable? Was it really so not feasible for Yaakov? Yaakov kavin ma'od. There was a lot of people with Yaakov. There was a lot of livestock with Yaakov. It wasn't feasible. So they will only approach there over many days. And indeed, it took a long time. It took a long time to get from place to place with that large group. Okay. So this is a very interesting point the Ramban is saying here, that he's just explained to Yaakov. So besides the medrash that there's a great value in her being buried there, It wasn't feasible. So please, and the main thing I'm asking of you is not to bury me outside of Israel. And I didn't bury her outside of Israel. Skipping about half a line. Now, this is fascinating. The Ramban says, I think this is all sort of being said, sort of just to kind of, check the box. Yosef understands this. Yosef understands that she died on the road and that this was, the least bad way to deal with it, and that he gave kavod to her, etc. Really why Yaakov didn't bury her in Maras HaMachpelah? He didn't want to have two sisters buried there as his wives. Ki yevosh me avosav. Because it's embarrassing. This is the burial plot with the family, with his parents, with his grandparents. And this is, of course, a famous question. I don't know if we've discussed it. If we discussed it this year, my guess is we discussed it earlier times, if not this year. It's a famous question how Yaakov could marry two sisters. In the first place, of course, the Torah had not yet been given, but there was certainly an idea of the patriarch keeping the Torah. So he says that's where he's lying with his very distinguished family, and it's embarrassing to be there with two sisters. So the Ramban says that's the real pshat why Rachel isn't buried in Maras HaMachpelah. V'Leah he anisei slo rishona beheter. Now how are you going to choose which? So if you don't want to bury both sisters there, how are you going to choose which sister to bury there? Well, who was the one who married him first? Leah. So there's no eyebrow raising in Leah being presented as Yaakov's wife. For Rachel, bi'avaso also, who baneder asher nadar lo lekacha. Yaakov had great affection for Leah. Yaakov had vowed that he would marry her. So he felt, again, it wasn't a commandment at the time. It wasn't a real prohibition to not marry sisters. It was sort of a spirit not to do it. So Yaakov felt that the right thing to do was to marry Rachel. But there is a certain amount of embarrassment to present himself to the rest of the family like that. And Rachel was the one that was an eyebrow raiser because he was already married to Leah, the sister. It's a very interesting Ramban. Okay. Now let's go to the Orach Chaim. Orach Chaim on Pasuk Zayin. Va'ani bivoi mipadon. Kasuv zeh ein lo kesher ima shel ma'ala mimenu gam ein yodua kavanas hodazu. This pasuk doesn't seem to have any connection with the previous psukim. And it's unclear even what Yaakov is really conveying to Yosef when he says this pasuk. And of course, the famous idea that Yaakov feels he has to explain why he didn't do for Rachel what he wanted Yosef to do for him. This is a really good point. The Orach Chaim says, if the reason why Yaakov is saying this to Yosef has to do with, I know I'm asking you to bury me there. I don't want you to be upset at me why I didn't bury your mother there. This is not the spot for it. We're on verse 7. This should have been verse 5. Sorry. This should have been, this should have been the end of chapter 47. No, one more time. Yes. Okay. Hold on 1 second. Mem Zayin. Yeah, I'm there. This should have been the end of chapter 47 when Yaakov is talking to Yosef about burying him in Israel. This is not even what he's talking about right now. He's talking about the special status of Yosef's sons. So why is this here? And I want to remind you, this was a different meeting. Remember, Yaakov has had 2 exchanges with Yosef now. So the earlier exchange was when Yaakov realized his end was coming near, not because he was terribly sick, just he understood. So he calls Yosef in and he talks about burial. This is about talking about Yosef's sons. So where in the world is this? Why is this here? And also the Orach Chaim is interested in the word alai, that Rachel died on me, which we already discussed with the Ramban. Okay. Hamuftach b'hem sheyetzu mimenu heim elu niskavin ba'omro va'ani b'vawi ki usiba shlo yatsu mimenu mamish litzad shugaram shetarbos Rachel fu omro mesa alai. Really interesting. So what the Orach Chaim says is, if Menashe and Ephraim are supposed to have tribal status, and they're being treated like Yaakov's sons, and that's really what Yaakov said, just like in verses 5 and 6. So let's just ask a simple question. If they're supposed to be treated like Yaakov's sons, why aren't they Yaakov's sons? Why not? What? If they're so special and this and that, you could pose that question. So says the Orach Chaim, Yaakov is answering that question. You know why they're not my sons? Because they're supposed to come from Rachel's branch of the family, and she died. Right? Binyamin she passed away when having Binyamin in the process. So there was no opportunity to have more children with her. That's why these people are supposed to be like, my sons are really my grandsons. And he says, that's why it says Mesa Alai. She died on me. Perish al Sibasi. Also an interesting statement. It's my fault that Rachel died. It's my fault that Rachel died when she did. Ka'omram zal shashan nidro. There's an idea. Yaakov makes a vow that if God takes care of him, he'll do all these things in service of God. So there's an approach in the Medrash that he tarried in doing that. And the punishment for that is that his wife passed away younger than she would have. Or maybe some of you have heard of this one. When Lavan comes because somebody stole his truffim, his little idols, Yaakov gets very angry at Lavan. And Yaakov says, listen, check it out. Whoever from my camp here has those idols shouldn't live. Now, who was the one who had those idols? Rachel was the one who had those idols. And there's a famous idea that obviously he wasn't trying to curse his wife, but that there was a potency in that. And that's why she died earlier than she would have. So either way, the Orach Chaim says that Yaakov is explaining to Yosef why if Menashe and Ephraim have this special status, why they're not actually his children. And he even says Mesa Alai, that he takes the blame for the fact that she died at such a young age. Very, very interesting. Okay, let's go on to verse 10. Veinei Yisrael kavdu mizoken. The eyes of Yaakov were heavy from age. Lo yuchal liros. He wasn't able to see. Vayagesho samelav. He brought Menashe and Ephraim to him. Vayishak lohem, vayichabek lohem. He kissed them and he hugged them. Okay. Sforno. Lo yuchal liros hetev. Wasn't able to see well. Kidei shetachol alav birchaso biroso osam. Because he wanted to see them, because there's a power in seeing the person that you're blessing. Ki inyan ashir tirenu misham. Balak takes Bilam to, when he's going to curse the Jews, Balak says to Bilam, I want you to see them from there, because it'll be more potent. So the Sforno says the reason why it says, like it says, Yaakov couldn't see, he brought them close. Again, this seems to be too much information. Why is this important? So the Sforno explains that he needed to connect with them in order to give them a meaningful bracha. Again, whatever the powers are of this bracha, it's not just like nice words. So the normal way to connect is to look at the person, but he couldn't see them. So therefore, he wanted to embrace them, because that would be a way physically for him to connect with them, because he couldn't do it by vision. Just an interesting shot. So we discussed this morning the Ramban and the Orach Chaim regarding why Yaakov was telling Yosef at this juncture that he had to bury Rachel on the road. And we also discussed the Sforno, why it's important that Yaakov couldn't see well at this point in time.